I'm really excited to be here today and speaking moderating this panel on community-based organizations. And today we're going to be speaking with three of our members from three incredible organizations, and we'll hear about their experiences in building those organizations and supporting them and what they've learned from the process. The panel will be followed by an open discussion like most of our peer-to-peer sessions, or all of our peer-to-peer sessions, I should say. And with that, I'd just like to jump right in and introduce our panelists. So up first, we have Latricia Adams, who is the founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint, a national environmental justice and civil rights organization with the purpose of bringing like-minded organizations together to collectively take action and advocate against the crisis of lead exposure and environmental injustice in disadvantaged communities throughout the nation. Latricia is the youngest African-American woman appointed to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where she serves as co-chair of the Executive Order on Revitalizing Our Nation's Commitment to Environmental Justice for All Working Group, among many other honors and distinctions. We also have Shannon Francis, who is a Hopi and Diné from the Southwest homelands of Arizona and New Mexico. She is Towering House Clan, born for Red Running into the Water Clan. Her Hopi clans are Masao, Bear Sand, and Snake Clan. Shannon comes from 12 generations of earth caretakers, ethnobotanists, and seed keepers, and she is a certified permaculture design instructor, weaving traditional ecological knowledge with innovative science. Shannon is also the executive director for Spirit of the Sun, Incorporated in Denver, Colorado, which received the 2020 Human Rights Award from Youth Celebrate Diversity. And she co-created and led an indigenous permaculture community garden project with the Four Winds American Indian Council and has received the Justin B. Willey Humanitarian Award on the Navajo Nation, as well as the Cesar E. Chavez Female Leadership Award for her work with indigenous gardening, food justice, and community building projects. And finally, we have David Southgate, a community-based adaptation and development practitioner and researcher. David serves as a board member for Un Nuevo Amanecer, Incorporated in Playa de Ponce, Puerto Rico. David is active in justice-focused, community-based climate adaptation as a scholar, a land use practitioner, and community activist. He
Hey,
is,
how you doing, my friend?
Well,
he,
good to see you.
he is a Ralph Johnson Bunch Distinguished Graduate Fellow and PhD student in Public Affairs and Community Development at Rutgers University in Camden, and is interested in how planning and other social processes shape climate adaptation and produce just environmental and social outcomes in the Afro-Latino, Afro-Danish U.S. territories of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Southgate got his start in environmental justice and land revitalization in Puerto Rico, and today he subcontracts with EPA's technical assistance to brownfields programs to channel institutional partnerships and funding that address community-identified land use priorities. Okay, that was a mouthful, but now I'm ready to jump straight in. And the first question that I have is for all of our panelists, and that's I'd like to just ask how your organizations began and how you became involved in the work. And I'd love to start with you, Shannon.
Good morning, Yat Yeah, for us, we started out as a private foundation, which was based in Phoenix, Arizona. And the relationships with our founders for Spirit of the Sun were all older senior men but they had built relationships. They had built relationships over time with some of the tribes. And so it was more consulting for Native American economic development. And then later on, they decided to transition to a nonprofit when it moved to Denver, Colorado. So we've been a nonprofit since 2010, and then slowly building up our audience, building up the mission, and the mission had changed from adults and elders to primarily young adults and youth. So we serve ages up to 2 to 24, and have slowly just built our funding. And our biggest program at that point to help us build the capacity was AmeriCorps community CNCS, and that was primarily 1-year service vistas, and we had I think we're the largest. We're in our 13th year for the VISTA program, and this is the last year that we can actually participate in the program. So AmeriCorps gave us grant writers. We created positions for fundraising, volunteer management, resource development, marketing, and media. And that was a foundation of our organization. And some of those vistas transitioned into permanent staff, and such as our grant writer, Leah. And she's just amazing. The last two grant writers have also been vistas and most of our primary staff. And so we've jumped from a staff of 4 to 5 to 17 last year, and we're still about 10, 11 staff right now. So we're really trying to keep moving forward. We're getting the funding. We're figuring out how to, we're a remote team. The only time we come together is when we're running programs in person, but we've actually been able to master working remotely and saving time and being able to stretch our budget a little bit more by saving time. So, but we're doing really well right now. We're running about 9 to 11 programs over the course of the year, our biggest with the Elders Food Share, and we've applied for more funding to expand our programs. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Shannon. And one, that's an incredible journey, and we'll follow up with some questions down the line about how you've managed that growth and about how an organization can maintain their identity as they're growing like that. But I'd like to turn this first question as well to Latricia. Again, how did your organization get started, and how did you end up in the work?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So our story is very unique. So just in full transparency, by trade, I used to be a middle school teacher and a high school teacher. And in 2015, at that particular moment in time, I served as the vice president for Thursday Network with the Greater Washington Urban League, which is a young professionals affiliate chapter in Washington, D.C. So even though the Flint water crisis actually occurred in April of 2014, it was a whole year before it made national media. Um, there's a lot of things that are really insidious that happens to communities of color, specifically largely a more majority Black cities. But honestly, it was just something that just really disturbed my spirit
Mm.
around what happened in Flint. I'm originally from Memphis. Memphis has good barbecue and good tap water because we have a natural sand aquifer. And so to think in at that time, the year of our Lord, 2014, 2015, that we had a city that could not bathe in water, couldn't drink in water, where the water was literally killing them was just like, I was angry. I was really upset. And also, in full transparency, I felt at that time that some of our historical civil rights organizations weren't stepping up and supporting the city of Flint in the way that I felt that they should. At that particular point in time, millennials were still the babies of the bunch. We're not anymore. We got Gen Z, love it. But at that particular point in time, we were like, well, we're not going to wait. We're just going to do what we can, right? And so initially in the crisis, we responded like many people did during the earlier parts of the crisis, where we did water donation drives, which we learned was extremely expensive. We were young millennials. We didn't have money. We had full-time jobs, still not making very much. And many of us lived on the East Coast, which is extremely expensive. We had to do what we had to do, but still deliver. So honestly, we did this big national water distribution to the city of Flint. At that point in time, I was like, I know that this doesn't get to the systemic issue that caused the Flint water crisis, but at least we did something. That really wasn't enough. So fast forward to January of 2016, I met who later became a co-founder of the organization. So with Thursday Network, we did these membership orientations. And so the young lady, her name is Michelle, had never met this young lady before in life. And she said, I like, that you did this project to support Flint, but did you know that like lead is not just the issue in Flint? And when she said that, I was like, well, I know about lead-based paint, right? I know about paint chips, but honestly, I made that connection with my grandparents, like with the lead paint chips. I didn't necessarily know at that time how pervasive the issue was. And so the reason why I gave a bit of a timeline is because what she said next just was such a pivotal moment for me personally in this work. She said, did you know that Freddie Gray experienced childhood lead poisoning? If you recall, or if you don't recall, Freddie Gray was actually murdered by Baltimore police. He had significant challenges from mental health issues that literally stem from childhood lead poisoning. So I was already mad about like what was happening in Flint, Michigan. But literally that night, I went down a whole rabbit hole and learned that there were so many issues surrounding lead poisoning, not just in Flint, not just in Baltimore, but literally in my own hometown. Now, I just bragged about Memphis having some of the most pristine water because of a sand aquifer. We have lead service lines everywhere. We have almost 20,000 lead service lines in my hometown. Taking it a step further, where I got baptized, where my parents were married, the first church that my great grandparents went to, they're lead service lines. So this became very personal and just, for lack of better words, just very divine purpose. So essentially, we did a lot more than just doing water distributions, water donation drives. We really turned to political advocacy because we felt like while yes, we need to meet the needs of the immediate resources to communities in distress, we have to address the systemic issues that causes these disparities to happen altogether. And so, interestingly enough, in 2016, we did our first big service trip. We convinced the National Urban League to show up and to use their influence to help us with their water donation drive. Like, y'all have money, we don't. We don't have Urban League money. And so, maybe like 2 weeks after our first trip to Flint, we had youth with us. So we brought youth with us from DC. Had an opportunity to engage with youth from Flint. 2 weeks after that trip, those same DC youth that traveled with us got letters from their school saying that it was lead in their school drinking water. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And our nation's capital, these babies have lead in their school drinking water. So I was mad for the third time, just kept being upset. And so at that point, I at that time worked for DC Public Schools in our central office at that time, in the office of the chief operating officer. I risked my whole career. I took off from work in a millennial fashion. I didn't take anybody's time off. I just left. I testified before city council to call out my own employer and city council for essentially knowingly that there were lead service issues. There have been whistleblowers in Ward 8, which is east of the river in DC, which is where the majority of Black people that hadn't been pushed out of the district still reside, have been screaming for the top of their lungs with water quality issues, but no one listened into a majority white affluent neighborhood that was fully gentrified, spoke out, then they actually responded. I felt like the city council, as well as our district, needed to be called out about that. And so that actually led to what's called the Childhood Lead Poison Prevention Amendment Act of 2017. I didn't come up with that name. Essentially, that bill is the strongest bill in the country that mandates testing for lead in school drinking water. And so we were like, if we got this passed in DC, we need to get this passed in Michigan. We need to get this passed in Maryland. We need to get this passed in Tennessee. And so we have today gotten those bills passed in each respective state, and we wanted to keep growing. Right now, it is not mandated from the federal government. It is nearly recommended, but we want this to be mandatory. So essentially, our work that literally started as just being responsive with providing resources to community literally transformed into this political advocacy kind of machine that not just focuses on lead poisoning prevention in water, but lead in consumer products, lead in paint, lead in soil, the implications for residential housing, the intersection with reproductive health and lead exposure is what truly like set this organization in a direction that I never would have imagined. So that's how we got started in this work.
Wow. That is an incredible and a tragic story. And I have to say, anyone who wants to check out the Black Millennials for Flint website, the resources on that site are really a wealth. And I happened to read one of the articles that you had on the site that taught me that 87% of the schools here in New York City where I live have lead pipes. And it was just a, a devastating statistic to hear. So thank you so much for your work. And again, we'll follow up with some more questions on that. But for now, I'll turn to David Southgate. And again, how did you get involved in the organization? I know you come as a board member from the organization, but with a long experience with them. And what is it that brought them into being?
Hi, Stewart. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to say thank you to my fellow presenters today. It's a pleasure to be invited and to share the stage with such esteemed nonprofit leaders, Ms. Shannon Francis and Ms. Latricia Adams. I really enjoyed hearing what you shared. Greetings from Puerto Rico's South Coast. We are the largest coastal barrier in the region. About Playa, I want to give you a little bit of context about our place because it makes sense why our organization emerged from this. So first of all, about Playa, which is one of 31 barrios in the autonomous municipality of Ponce, Puerto Rico. Our barrio itself has nearly 24 neighborhoods comprising some 11,000 people. We have Afro-Caribbean traditions that are unique to our barrio, such as next week's Carnival de Playa. And we've also got another tradition that is much less well documented, but in studying and reading and then speaking with neighbors, I can see these practices of mutual aid were already embedded into our community. And here's why. So existing reciprocal practices that existed in Playa's informal slum communities were the result of U.S. corporate agricultural land grabs that displaced thousands of Puerto Ricans that were working the land at the beginning of the 20th century. And so by the mid-20th century, you saw an immigration of peasants, basically, from rural areas looking for a way to make a living. And so they congregated towards the urban areas where there were more industrialized jobs. And that's the same thing that happened to our barrio. But interestingly enough, people adapted. And among the social practices that are emerged were this mutual aid for neighbors living in extreme poverty. And so also community organizing in our barrio began to really emerge some 50 years ago because of the work of Sister Sor Isalina Ferre, who was a Catholic nun, who saw the deplorable living conditions in our neighborhoods in the early 1970s and the late 60s, and formed what today still exists, Los Centros de Sor Isalina Ferre. And that my sense was that in the early 70s, by training youth within our barrio about reciprocal practices and about how to community organize, we still have some of these community organizers who have those memories and have those experiences. So fast forward, Un Nuevo Amanecer, we'll call it UNA, it might be easier for people. These experiences formed the basis for Un Nuevo Amanecer, which was incorporated in 2018 by our visionary founders, Ramon Figueroa and Pastor Roberto Ortiz, in the wake of 2017 hurricanes Maria and Irma, and really the dreadful need to feed and clothe and provide services and support for our most vulnerable neighbors where our government was failing them post-hurricane. I don't need to tell you about it. You've heard the horror stories. I heard them months afterwards because we didn't have electricity and we didn't have any way of hearing what the world was saying about us. It was really extremely traumatic, and even more so, I think, for my neighbors, because we lived without electricity for 26 days. And this is what brought me into this. We lived without electricity for 26 days, which is horrible. But we have neighbors who lived without electricity for months and who still today have roofs that are leaking, have homes that are barely providing shelter for them, plus repeated flooding. So I got involved with Nuevo Amanecer because of my history in working in EJ communities in Puerto Rico. Probably the most notorious one was for a set of neighborhoods that were downwind from a petrochemical corridor and a solid waste management unit that was receiving poisonous, toxic coal ash, and the neighbors were being exposed. There was a lot of press, and so my name got out there. Well, Pastor Roberto reached out to me, and we did a project about floodwaters laced with dangerous sewage, and we documented that. So after the hurricanes happened, also my spirit was disturbed, to repeat what Latricia said. I could see that people were very vulnerable, and I could also see very, very clearly, like never before, the spatial distribution of vulnerabilities and an even distribution of those vulnerabilities, even in our barrio. So at the end of 2019, I got this funny email from Harriet that I'd never heard of. Harriet's the executive director, obviously, of Anthropocene Alliance. She reached out to me and we had a chat. And then the earthquakes happened in 2020 or in the early 2020s and hit our region. And that conversation with Harriet spurred within me, I think, the impulse to not try to be a one-man show and tackle really all of this on my own. Because number one, when there's money involved, it's, from my perspective, it's better to have layers and layers of transparency and also be very, very accountable to your community regarding those funds. And the natural way of doing that is by moving the relationship, for me personally, to an institution. And so that's why I approached Nuevo Amanecer, some of the leaders with whom I already had relationships built and successful relationships. And I said, hey, we've got this opportunity. Would you like to take on a Anthropocene Alliance as a partner? And they said yes. And so then the A2 opened a lot of doors with the Army Corps of Engineers, with Climate Migration Network, with buy-in community planning, with Thriving Earth Exchange, and a National Coastal Resilience Fund, some of which I'll be speaking about, I think, a little bit later. But that's kind of the background. It's a long story. I could have made it shorter, but that's what we got.
Thank you so much, David. And everybody here, many of our members, the story is always long, but they're doing their best to get down to the heart of it. And we deeply appreciate the work that you're all doing. I want to turn back to Latricia, and at this part, I just have a few questions for the organizations or for our panelists that kind of get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of actually how to build up these organizations and how you manage to achieve the victories that you achieved. And so Black Millennials for Flint obviously arose out of a crisis and an ongoing one at that. And I wonder if you definitely spoke at length about the legislative accomplishments that you guys have achieved, but I wonder if we could just dig into that a little more and explore how you brought those coalitions together, how starting from the very beginning of an organization you managed to create that coalition and what our members can maybe take as they're starting out on that same journey to turning crisis into action.
Sure, and thank you for that question. So one of the things that I believe has been the most helpful to us as an organization is
Sorry, one moment, Latricia, if we could.
sure.
All right, there we go. Thanks.
No worries. Is to build leadership pipelines. So one of the things that we realize with working in community, particularly in Black communities, there's something that we call a Messiah complex, where people feel like it's this one chosen leader that's supposed to like reconcile everything. Oftentimes we even think about like archetypes like Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, where honestly, we're all leaders in our own respective right. And I'm gonna sound real churchy because I'm still a native Memphian. Everybody has their own respective ministry, right? And so one of the things that we really focus on a lot within the organization is you do not have to be an environmental scientist, an environmental attorney, or something with a fancy title or something with some type of adjacency to academia. Your own lived experience makes you an expert. And so we do a lot of work around training and development within the community so that people can speak for themselves. We also, and this, with one of my colleagues on the panel was speaking about trying to gain resources. We're very innovative with the resources that we do have, because like I'm one generation removed from poverty. I understand the nuances around the barriers that prevent you from sometimes being able to advocate in the way that you would like. So with those resources, we provide like childcare stipends. We literally will get somebody to watch your children, even if it's on site. If you have to take off from work, because let's be real, what time of the day do these elected bodies have these hearings? It's at 8 o'clock in the morning. Who can go to that if you got to go to work, right? And so we literally will try to offset like PTO or time off that you may lose if you work somewhere where it's hourly, for example, so that you don't have to make a choice between advocating for yourself versus trying to make a living and support yourself and your family. The other part that we do a lot of work with, and this is where we find ally organizations to be very helpful. We take very complex information and try to make it tangible. Meaning that when you talk about environmental issues, it could be real heavy and real technical. And everyday people don't have time to try to unpack that. So we unpack it for people so that it's easily accessible. So you know exactly how this is impacting you directly. That may look like giving you suggested scripts, having public comment training in hybrid environments where you could be on your device, you could be wherever you want to be, but essentially making it very personal, but still having enough information so you can know what's happening, because it's just too much sometimes to have the expectation that people are going to be able to digest the whole literature review on whatever the issue that may be prominent at that time. And then the last thing that I will say is bringing people into spaces where they don't expect young Black folk.
Mm.
So that means in meeting with Congress and holding you accountable. So another thing that we really push hard within the organization is you pay these people salaries for agencies and you put them in office and you have the power to take it all back. So when we talk about this is where entitlement is okay. You are entitled to that. And we want people to feel like they have access to our democracy. So we do a lot of that work in community. And we also, and I'm biased because I used to be a teacher, we consistently try to make this intergenerational and make sure that young people are included in this work. Especially when we think about like the work that we do in Flint. These children, like if y'all remember Mari, Little Miss Flint, y'all, she's in high school. That means that she was 6 years old when the crisis happened. So it's imperative for those young people who are so vulnerable to these environmental crises for them to have a voice in this movement. But that means that we still have to build capacity. We still have to support our young people to be able to be loud but accurate. Sometimes it can be a little loud and wrong, but making sure that they have the right information so that they can best advocate for themselves and their respective communities.
I love that. And both in the sense of that knowing that you have more agency almost by nature of just being the person experiencing the problem, or certainly by nature of that. And again, this intergenerational approach, so much good and practical and fantastic advice there. Thank you so much, Latricia. David, I wanted to ask you, early on in UNA's history, which I know it's still a fairly young organization in some ways, the organization managed to receive, I believe, $1.1 million in funding and technical assistance. And for a small or for a startup organization, I'm sure that's a massive logistical challenge to handle. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how UNA managed to scale up and meet the expectations that come with that level of funding, and how they even go about securing that in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, there's nothing like building an airplane while you're flying it, is there? So that's basically what we're doing here. And I want to also emphasize, though, that the figure you mentioned doesn't include the rest of the work that the organization has been doing to build what is essentially a community hub, complete with private emergency response services, short band radio. So we have communication to the outside world if everything goes sideways. Solar energy production and storage, water cistern, laundry facility for emergency use, and a community kitchen, as well as, meeting facilities. And these are all things that were done by the board of directors and the membership. And I'm just there in my capacity to support them. But what I brought to them was this idea of community-based and community-led research. And so in my role, sometimes I would take the lead on applicants or take the lead on researching and finding sponsors within the city to receive the Corps of Army Engineers or FEMA BRIC direct technical assistance. On other occasions, A2 supported us. But of particular note, I think it's many of the organizations that emerge in communities, first of all, begin as all volunteer organizations, perhaps with a mission that doesn't relate anything to do with adaptation to climate issues. And the reason why we are thrust into this space is because our governments have failed us. And we are, as one of my professors said, the politics of last resort on the front lines of climate change. And it's a reality that many of us face. We didn't have a 501c3. And so if we were to receive federal funds, we needed to rely on sponsorship from other organizations. And I realized very quickly that those other organizations may not share the values and may not share the same kind of commitments to community that we have. And at the end of the day, they don't have to see our neighbors, and we do, because we're embedded in our community. And so we were in the enviable position of not having a whole bunch of assets, which meant that applying for the 501c3 was actually a very simple process. And we resolved it within the space of about 2 weeks to a month, if I'm remembering correctly. And we got that in September of 2021. We sought out a partner to help us accomplish that. And so a tip for folks is identify some of these partners and identify some of the issues early on that you are seeing and anticipating, and look for partners either within this coalition, which is outside of our community, or within our community based on the social capital that you can access. And then the other issue, we are still awaiting on our official award from the National Coastal Resilience Fund for reasons I won't go into, but it's happening. And to be able to use those federal funds, we needed to have accounting and acquisition provisions and procedures and policies that we didn't have, that conform with federal and perhaps territory regulatory requirements for management of public funds. And again, find that help early. If you know you're going to go after these funds, make sure that you have these policies available, or people who have them, who can provide them and explain them to you. In our case, A2 helped us to create some boilerplate descriptions and helped us get them translated into Spanish, which was phenomenal. A2's helped us create sort of standard language and a data set that can help us more quickly cobble together a proposal. And this is kind of legwork for volunteers that's arduous and tough to accomplish. So we were very grateful for that kind of assistance. Find your team of experts. Mira, my experience is in community development. I don't know anything about oceans. I don't know anything about shorelines and nature, except I love it, right? So when we had to develop the National Coastal Resilience Fund, I reached out to Harriet and I said, Harriet, we need some experts who can weigh in on this. So we're actually putting our best foot forward. And we found those experts, and they provided revisions and review and suggestions to project framing as we were moving forward. So actually we could win it. The all volunteer team includes an all volunteer accountant who is great at accounting, but not a CPA. And so A2 supported us and our partner organizations and colleagues in Puerto Rico by recruiting a Spanish language speaking CPA in training that our accountant can consult with now. And this is a really good step in the right direction. So when we receive these federal funds, we will be able to properly manage them. And then I think that there's a lot of risk for burnout. So I would suggest that you find colleagues, both within your community and outside of your community, who can share successes and challenges with. By speaking to partners, I said, oh God, this isn't really sustainable as a volunteer. I have to pay my bills. I have to keep the electric on. And so by even voicing that concern, the generosity of many different partners came forward with stipends that helped to maintain and justify in my own family spending time not on making money, but spending time on community work. And it was extremely helpful. And in my case, and probably anyone's case who would receive a stipend for doing volunteer work, really, invaluable to help us persist. And then I would say that develop the talent within your community, identify that talent, and then compensate for them for their time is really important. In our case, we wanted to do research based and led in our community. So we found our field workers and we trained them how to do the kind of research projects that we've been doing, and we deployed them, and they did a really marvelous job. I realized that oftentimes I'm called upon to present to audiences such as yourself because I dominate English, obviously, but many of my partners in the community don't. And we had a wonderful opportunity with the River Network, and they provided a translation service, an interpretation service. So one of the community field workers could actually join me in the presentation. And obviously she was compensated for doing so. But I think it was a new experience for her. I think it was a really valuable and a positive experience for her. And I think that by bringing these voices forward and allowing people to speak in their own language does justice for language as well, and is a respectful thing to do. And so, whenever our institutions can help us with that, that's fantastic. And then in terms of developing talent for community organizing, convening people, convening your communities in meetings, it's really hard work. We use door-to-door canvassing, phone calling, and collaborative approaches to hosting in distributed areas. So we didn't make everyone to go to one spot. We tried to put the meetings in the neighborhoods, and it was pretty successful, I would say. I would also advise folks to set up their fundraising platforms as soon as you have your 501c3 in place and your banking things in place. Get those fundraising platforms ready, because there will become a time when someone says, how do I donate to you? And you're going to want to be able to say, oh, it's very easy. Here's how to do it. And then cultivate your relationships with the volunteers and the donors and community partners, and make sure that you stay in touch with them and let them know, how much you appreciate them and the successes and the opportunities that present.
Thank you so much, David. And I just have one more question on my end for Shannon, and then we'll open it up to everybody in the interest of making sure that the members here today can ask any questions that they would like to. And Shannon, Spirit of the Sun, you mentioned, has since, I believe, 2009 been a 501c3 and existed in other forms before that. So it's been around for quite a long time. And in that sense, one, I just want to acknowledge the incredible work that has been done. And you've built partnerships with and worked with at least 4 tribal nations. And again, through AmeriCorps, I believe I saw that it's where you've been working in 12 states and US states and territories. And my question for you is, how, as you have continued as an organization over that much time, how did you come to both establish your identity and your community presence, and how do you maintain, or what is the challenge of maintaining and preserving that identity as an organization grows and avoids, say, mission creep or just losing the sense of the initial purpose?
I was brought up here in this community. I think I arrived here in around 17 years old. And my family moved from California, from San Diego, and had to establish themselves. And when my mom my mom is great at like doing outreach and connecting, and always been part of the, my school and community, and was the first one to reach out to St. Frank Valley schools and find that there was a Indian Ed program, and connected with Boulder Indian Ed, and then the larger Native community, and then put me in contact with a mentoring JTPA program because there were no other Native kids, and we had no idea we're Native people, and it's an underground community. It's very, very small. We're like, the population for us is like 0.01% of the population. So it's very, very small. So really finding those pockets where powwows are happening, where other events are happening, just to make that social connection is really hard when you're first going, moving to a new community. So my mom was able to do that. And then I just started volunteering as a teenager. I was kind of a wild child, but I was actually learning a lot from the elders, and learning like a lot of the protocols and traditions in different tribes, and started bonding with families. And then as I started having my own family, I have 6 children. Most of that time I was a single mom, but really looking and learning the lessons of and challenges of being a single mom, being a Native woman, and then through leadership and the things that I was doing in the community, really helped me uh, make things equitable for our staff, like, bringing our children to work, like being able to work remotely, being able to finally get health insurance, and those the connections of knowing who those community leaders are, the spiritual elders, prominent families who have been here forever since Sand Creek Massacre. That's another thing about the historic and the bioregions of these, places are all indigenous lands. And so when we're talking about land back and rematriation, like I seek out the families and the key leaders first to make sure that I get feedback, that we're reaching out to community and asking our families and our youth, we want this to be a community-led organization. So a lot of it is getting feedback, surveys, community assessments from our community, because these funds go directly to our communities. And it's been a challenge, like trying to navigate through dysfunction of community, trying to be able to stay out of crossfire between clans, between tribes, between, different, I don't want to say factions, but different groups. And so it's been a challenge, and trying to bring people together in the midst of COVID. I think we've mastered really trying to build community and stay focused on what's priority for us, and that's healing a community that has generations and generations of historic trauma, PTSD, and anxiety. How do we move through that to promote the healing through cultural resilience, through some of our programs like our Mycelium Healing Project? So it's taking us probably about a good 10 years to find out like what the community needs are. And our previous leadership was not from the community here. So when I stepped in, I already had a background of community building and being able to navigate through the community in ways that really promote the ways of protocol as well too. So different nations do different things in different ways, and you don't want to overbreach those protocols. And so like when you go into a territory of someone else's or homelands, you acknowledge that territory by offering gifts and acknowledgement. And so I was taught that, and not very many people know how to do that, but I'm trying to teach those intergenerational relationships through traditional protocols and helping remind people that this is the way these nations do specific things in order to build unity and to build respect and to build trust. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. And a beautiful answer at that. With the time that we have remaining, I want to step back and just invite anybody in the meeting today, if they have any questions that they'd like to ask for our panel or thoughts. And if you'd like, you can also throw a question in the chat. Yeah, Sylvia.
Hey there. Thanks for the organizers and organizations that presented today. I'm Sylvia Brown, located in South Arkansas with Disability Outreach Touch Engage. And I follow Latricia, or at least Black Millennials for Flint on social media channels. Thank you for being representative of the Mid-South. Certainly its challenges with getting resources, attention to organizations located in the South and are centering Black issues and communities. I wanted to find a little bit more out about the support that you provide community members to value their lived experiences as leadership, the stipends for childcare workers, support for those folks to be off the job to testify or to be just a visible presence at community programs. How has that worked out, and has that been something you've gotten direct support from funders, or is it couched in overall organizing language?
Yes, so thank you for your kind words and for following us on social media. But we have found success with just being very explicit in the budget. So in grant applications. So specifically with foundations, what we found, because I don't think that a lot of people like explicitly name that as a need. We actually got positive feedback specifically from foundations for asking for that. So as opposed to like trying to couch it in like with what you may pay like for like door knockers, for example, like people that are doing like campaign type of work, we explicitly as a line item say child care coverage. And we literally say like PTO like reimbursement, essentially. Then also we also put in there, depending on like how house what's the word I want to use? How strict some foundations may be. We also are forthcoming with the way that we give that money out. So for example, with some people that we work with in community, they might not have a bank account or they might be in the negative. Let's be real, times are hard. And we work with youth. Youth, they don't have bank accounts like that. So we also explicitly on the front end say, we use electronic methods of payment. So we might send it to you through Cash App. We millennials and Gen Z over here, do Venmo, PayPal, or whatever. And we say that up front. So if the funder or the foundation, specifically, I'm really saying foundations because we found them to be the most meticulous. We tell them on the front end as a rationale so that they won't question us like on the back end. And it's more like informing them as a foundation. Like when we talk about doing social justice work, when we talk about like the barriers in community, we're literally explicitly telling you why this needs to be that way. But short answer is it's explicit. Like we name it like as its own individual line item, if that makes sense, in the budget.
If I could add as well that we also do stipends, and our accountant was concerned about giving people cash. My sense is that people prefer cash for the very reasons that Latricia just said. And so when I went to attempt, at least in Puerto Rico, to purchase a massive amount of gift cards. I was denied because of the potential fraud implications of that approach. So I came back to the accountant. I said, look, we got to give people cash. And so to protect ourselves in an audit situation, the accountant said, okay, you're going to get a photograph of the people's ID. You're going to get a signature next to the stipend amount that you give them. And in this way, we can document that these are actually real people, and a level of transparency in case we were questioned later. It's a lot of paperwork. But at the end of the day, people like to have a 20 or an 80 or a couple $100 in cash rather than a gift card, I think.
Kevin.
Hello. Yeah, I have a question for Shannon, and you sparked my interest. I put it in the chat anyway about permaculture. So another aspect that David didn't get into, I'm here in Puerto Rico. Our nonprofit is focused on resilient and sustainable agricultural solutions for Puerto Rico. There are a wide variety of estimates that say the amount of food that we import. Let's just say it's above 85%, and it comes from one port. And so, like David and like many stories of nonprofits here in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, I was like, this is not good. This is not good. There's no internet. There's no food. And I was a little shocked by, the lack of many things. So, that started a whole long process. But specifically, I wanted to know the whole aspect of permaculture here is a little bit missed in that they believe it's only like one of the choices that you could make in securing your agricultural future. And so what I found is that there's like this strong pull of the legacy people who want to do farming the way that it was always done, and the demands of so anyway, if you could hit me back, so kw@ahorainc.com. So just, I don't want to take this offline. I'm really interested in about how the elder generations have adapted to, like, we need to change everything. Yeah, it's great. All that knowledge you have is good, but we need to adapt to climate change and the demands of managing the soil and the water a little bit more. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can take a really quick minute. A lot of the elders have the traditional ecological knowledge and the ancestral memory knowledge of, like, everything that's happened to us up until now is in our genetic memory, what our families and our lineages have experienced, pandemics, like all these different things, and the shift in the environment, in the climate. And so what I always say is, you can modify your skills to adapt to climate change. You have to be open to that, plant deeper, do more composting. Like, if you do a little bit of different things, the land will respond. Mother Earth will respond, because she's trying to fix things and heal things in the soil, in the water, in the air. And so every little thing that we do, there is an impact. And so it doesn't have to be permaculture. It could be indigenous agriculture, because permaculture stems from indigenous knowledge. That knowledge was taken, Bill Mollison took it, he put it into formal design courses, and now people are commodifying off of those permaculture design courses. But it is based on indigenous knowledge and observation in alignment with the principles. The things that are missing from the knowledge, though, are stories, ceremonies, songs, and language. And so a lot of that, once you complete it, it is a whole indigenous knowledge and science lifeways. But when you break it down, you're just getting the indigenous science pieces of it. So you put the entirety back, like everyone comes from a bioregion. You all have your ceremonies, songs, stories, language where you come from. But when you're not practicing that, or you're relocated, or displaced into a different region, you tend to lose that. But our genetic memory is based on our bioregion. So hopefully that helps some.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, everybody.